You were born in a house where women wore silk and everyone talked quietly because your father slept behind the wall. Your skin was smeared with rose oil, pearls were woven into your hair, and everyone said you were beautiful, smart, promising. They said beauty was a blessing. That being seen by the Sultan was like being chosen by the stars. That a harem is not a cage, but a garden where women bloom like flowers. You listened and believed. Until you realized that a flower in the garden is not a mistress, but an ornament. You thought that if you were the gentlest, the most docile, the most graceful, you would be loved. But what if even the perfect concubine is just a shadow of another man's desire? And will you be able to escape that shadow? You were born into the household of a respected court official. The house was quiet, walled in by rules and roses. The women moved like shadows, always clean, always composed. Your mother rarely stepped beyond the tiled courtyard, but everyone said she was lucky. From the beginning, they taught you how to sit without slouching, how to breathe without being heard, how to lower your eyes without missing anything. You learned that silence wasn't absence, it was discipline. You became good at it. When you turned 7, your eldest aunt looked at you long and slow and said you were too beautiful to be hidden. She said it like a compliment, but something in her voice made you uncomfortable. Soon after, visitors came, not men, but women draped in silks with guards behind them. They asked no questions. They touched your hair, measured your height with glances, and murmured behind their veils. They smiled, but not at you. They smiled at what you could become. 10 days later, your mother wept without sound while your aunt wrapped you in perfumed fabric. You were being sent to the palace. Not married off. Given. Like a fine dish, or a chest of sugar. A gift. Everyone said it was an honor. You would live among the chosen. You would walk the marble halls of Isfahan. You would be seen by the Shah. They spoke of it as if they envied you. But their eyes avoided yours. You left with a golden scarf on your head and a cloth pouch of salt tied beneath your sash, a talisman from your grandmother. You were too small to understand what it meant to no longer own your own future. Too quiet to ask what would happen next. So you rode toward the heart of the empire, still believing that beautiful things were meant to bloom. The harem was not a palace but a maze. A place of locked doors, silent hallways, and women who moved like ghosts under heavy silk. Whispers floated through the air like dust, weightless, endless, impossible to catch. They gave you a new name. The old one disappeared in a single breath. From that moment on, you were Lala Tulip. All the girls were named after flowers. You weren't sure if it was meant to honor you or make you easier to forget. You were given a small room with carved screens and a polished mirror. 2 silent servants. A daily routine. Mornings for cleansing, afternoons for calligraphy and dance, evenings for quiet posture. There was always a rule to follow, always a shape to fit. At first, you felt lucky. You had cushions, scented water, warm food. You could sleep without fear. The silence wrapped around you like silk, so deep you could hear the garden breathe through the open windows. One morning, you spoke out of turn during lessons. Not loudly, just at the wrong moment. A matron struck your hand, gently but firmly, as if brushing a wrinkle from expensive fabric. You understood then, even your breath belonged to someone else. The older girls leaned close and warned you. Do not draw attention. Do not be clever. Do not be too still or too eager. Until the Shah chooses you, you are no one. You exist in limbo, decorated, perfumed, invisible. So you learned to fold yourself into the right angles. You smiled without teeth. You sat without weight. You walked without sound. And still, behind every courtesy and compliment, you felt a tension. Like silk pulled too tight. But sometimes, when the garden was quiet and the air smelled like ripe figs, you let yourself believe. That one day, he might notice you. That one glance could change your life. That there was still a story in which you would matter. The night you were chosen, they bathed you in milk. They oiled your skin with amber and rose, brushed your hair until your scalp burned, and dressed you in fabric the color of the deep sky just before dawn. Older women whispered phrases into your ear, not for conversation, but for performance. Words not meant to be heard, only absorbed. You trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of expectation. Everyone had said this was the beginning, the doorway to power, to favor, to meaning. They said if you played your role well, you could rise above the others. Be seen. Be remembered. The night unfolded in silence, broken only by the rustling of silk and the shifting of bodies. You became an object in motion, a soft presence beneath something heavier. He didn't ask your name. You didn't offer it. By morning you were one of the belongings. A woman not of status, but of inventory. No one had told you that to belong meant to vanish. That being chosen meant being owned. And that ownership had nothing to do with love. You no longer walked in the garden. Your schedule filled with training in stillness, in restraint, and smiling while your insides cracked like dry clay. You became an expert in soft compliance. A master of pleasant silence. One afternoon you heard raised voices. A girl you once spoke to in the baths was escorted away by guards. She had said something, no one repeated what. Only that she was gone. The message was clear: disrupt nothing, or you will be removed like a fallen petal. In exchange, they gave you gifts. More fabric. Perfume from India. A room with a window and cushions softer than memory. And with every new gift, you felt yourself dim a little more. It was a trade, comfort for presence. You looked lovely, but you were vanishing. In the mirror, you saw a woman dressed in midnight and gold. A woman with coal-darkened eyes and hands that never shook. But somewhere behind your gaze lived the girl who once sniffed a pouch of salt and wished to read the stories no one let her touch. She hadn't gone anywhere. She just had nowhere left to stand. You became pregnant. Whispers turned toward you with new weight. A child could mean status, security, even power, if it was a boy. A daughter, they said, was a prayer wasted on the wind. But still you hoped. For the first time, you hoped not for favor, but for change. The other women began to smile at you differently. Their compliments came slower, edged with sweetness too sharp to swallow. You had shifted in their eyes, from harmless ornament to possible rival. You had something now that they didn't. That meant danger. When the time came, you labored not in comfort, but in ritual silence, under the hands of strangers. Your body tore open under the weight of expectation. The child arrived quietly, eyes open too wide. A girl. Fragile. Familiar. Her face looked like yours, soft, solemn, uncertain. You thought a child might anchor you to something real. That being a mother might give you weight in a world where women floated or drowned. But she was taken almost immediately, passed to a wet nurse without ceremony. One of the matrons told you flatly that you were now an empty vessel. You would be filled again. At night you heard her crying in some distant room. A sound like your own voice turned backward. In the morning you painted your face, straightened your spine, and smiled like your body hadn't been broken open just days before. News spread quietly that one of the women, someone you once called a friend, had died. Poison, they said. No scandal. No screams. Just a misstep. She had dared to ask something of the Shah without permission. That was enough. You began to understand the rules more clearly. Love here was not a bond, but a blade. Every glance a calculation. Every smile a move. You weren't a queen or a pawn. You were the board. Played on. Bled on. Stepped over. But something in you shifted. Not rebellion, not yet. More like resolve. You couldn't escape. You couldn't protect her, not fully. But you could stay. Stay breathing. Stay watching. Stay standing. If not for yourself, then for the girl with your face and your silence. You wouldn't let her grow up in a world where no one even tried. You were just past 30, but in the harem that made you a relic. A faded bloom. The kind of woman young girls looked at with polite confusion, wondering how you were still here. You had lasted longer than most. But no one lasts forever. New arrivals came with wide eyes, smooth limbs, and voices that floated like music. They danced with the ease of birds and smiled like they hadn't yet tasted ash. You greeted them kindly. You showed them where the shadows lived. That was expected of you now. Your body had changed. Softer in places where it used to hold tension. Heavier in ways you couldn't hide. Your chest sagged beneath robes that used to cling. Your back curved not from age, but from years of polite endurance. Still, you bowed correctly. Grace survived where beauty faded. The Shah summoned you now and then. More out of ritual than desire. A nod to memory. You dressed carefully anyway. Perfumed yourself. Sat upright and still. You played the part even as the script grew thin. You learned to recognize the difference between being wanted and being remembered. You no longer hoped for anything. Not love. Not position. Not redemption. You simply watched. The young ones made the same mistakes. Too bold, too eager, too trusting. You didn't warn them. That was no longer your role. One afternoon, you heard a girl singing down the corridor. Her voice was delicate and unsure, like it was searching for permission to exist. You knew the tone before you knew the words. It was her. Your daughter. You didn't move. She wasn't allowed to know who you were. That was the rule. That was the cost. You still had your looks, they said. But it was the beauty of soft shadows on old stone. Not the kind that drew glances, only reflections. You'd become part of the architecture, always present, never quite seen. And still you breathed. You looked out the carved windows and watched the jasmine vines curl toward the sun. You listened to the garden murmur. You didn't ask for more. You had stopped reaching long ago. But there were moments, small, fragrant still, where simply being felt almost like freedom. Your final spring arrived without warning. The air turned warm early that year, carrying a sweetness that clung to the fabric of your room. Jasmine bloomed faster than usual, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the world was offering you softness. As if someone, somewhere, had quietly decided that maybe you'd earned rest. There were no more summons. No more guards tapping quietly at your door. Your name stopped echoing through corridors. At first, it stung, then it didn't. Silence became comfort. You no longer had to prepare yourself. You no longer had to pretend. One night you lay down as always, your body folded into the same space it had worn into the bedding. You exhaled slowly, as if emptying something that had been waiting for release. You did not wake up. The servants removed your body with quiet hands. There was no ceremony. The other women did not cry. They simply looked away, not out of cruelty, but habit. Grief was too risky here. Remembering was too dangerous. Beneath your pillow, they found a small silk pouch. Inside was a lock of dark hair, wrapped carefully, as if it might still carry a heartbeat. It was hers. The only part of you no one else had ever touched. A reminder not of what you were, but of what you were almost allowed to be. No one spoke your birth name. It had been gone for so long, even you had stopped trying to recall the shape of it in your mouth. You died as Lala, like hundreds before you, like hundreds after. But something lingered. A girl who once sat beside you started sleeping deeper. Another held her head a little higher when she walked past the lattice doors. No one said why. No one had to. So you remained. Not in records, not in stone, but in the way someone whispered less fearfully. In the way someone dared to think of their life as more than an ornament. In someone else's shadow, you had left your own. Quiet. Unnamed. But still here. You lived for 34 years. 25 of them inside the walls of the harem. You bore one child, lost 2 friends, and were given 3 names. Each name softened your past, rewrote your identity, erased a little more of who you once were. You smiled at the Shah 417 times. You lifted your eyes to meet his gaze only 12. Not once did you speak freely in his presence. Silence became your second skin, the one that didn't wrinkle, didn't betray you. Your luxuries were carefully counted. 6 rooms you were moved through as the years changed your value. 9 silk dresses that dulled with use. 1 small lump of salt tucked in the corner of a carved drawer, the only thing that ever truly belonged to you. If you are born beautiful, do not celebrate too quickly. That kind of beauty is currency, and it is never free to spend. If they call you a flower, look around. Make sure you're not growing in someone else's garden, watered only when they need you to bloom. And if one day someone tells you that being close to a powerful man is fortune, remember, even gold in a cage is still just decoration for a celebration that was never yours.